Hi, my name is Harvey Koenig, and I'm a lawyer with the Varnum Law firm. I'm here with my environmental law partner, Matt Eugster, and Varnum is proud to be a strategic sponsor of Manufacturing Growth Alliance. We're here this morning to talk to Michigan manufacturers about environmental regulation, particularly PFAS, which has been in the news a lot lately. Matt, what is PFAS?
Harvey, PFAS is an acronym for a large group of chemicals called perfluoroalkylated substances. You've probably seen that a lot in the news lately.
Yeah, and why is it getting so much attention in the news?
Well, PFAS has recently been subject to a high level of scrutiny, largely because significant health risks have been identified in conjunction with the use of PFAS. Also because it doesn't break down in the environment. That's why you often hear it referred to as the forever chemical.
Okay, now years ago there wasn't a lot of knowledge or regulation about PFAS, but there's been a lot more attention in recent years. What are some of the recent developments coming out of the Environmental Protection Agency related to PFAS?
Well, very recently, EPA has promulgated a new drinking water standard for PFAS, much lower than some of the old target levels, which weren't enforceable. That will have pretty significant impacts on public water supplies. Earlier this year, EPA promulgated new regulations that impose reporting requirements under the Toxic Substances Control Act that will require reporting for some industrial facilities that use or import PFAS substances. And then lastly, EPA has proposed to add PFAS to the list of hazardous substances under the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. When that happens, it will have implications at cleanup sites, landfills, and other places where releases of PFAS might have occurred.
Yeah, that's a lot of new developments. We'll break down each one of those. But before we even get to that, if I'm a manufacturer, how do I know if any of this even applies to me? Does everybody use PFAS? How do you know?
PFAS is in any number of industrial commercial products, most notably waterproofing agents and coatings, but it can be in anything, including lubricants. The only way to identify that material is to look at your supply chain safety data sheets and do an audit to see what materials you might have that contain PFAS.
Okay, so then if you have PFAS, you have to pay attention to the regulations. We'll get to that in a minute. Is there a way to get rid of PFAS in your process? What should people be thinking about?
Well, ideally, if you have an opportunity to find a replacement or to remove PFAS from the supply chain, that would be ideal. I think most operations, or it's pretty clear that the agencies are going to continue to try and regulate PFAS more stringently, and it may no longer be economically viable to use PFAS down the road.
Matt, we've talked a lot about the Federal Environmental Protection Agency, but Michigan also regulates environmental protection at the state level. Tell us a little bit about what's going on with the state of Michigan and PFAS regulation.
Well, Michigan already has a PFAS standard under our environmental cleanup statute. In addition to that, Michigan has, by executive order, formed the Michigan PFAS Action Response Team, which is sort of a task force that investigates and evaluates the cleanups that are ongoing at PFAS release sites.
So Matt, if I'm busy running my business, I'm making my product, how might I come into contact with this task force? What might happen?
Well, I think if that happens, it's going to be because a release was identified at or flowing through your site. So if I'm a manufacturer and I get a response or a letter from Eagle, I should be paying close attention to whether I'm a potential target of enforcement or if they're looking at me as a source of PFAS contamination. I think the answer at that point is, call your lawyer, talk to your environmental consultant, try and identify any sources at your site.
Right, and earlier we had talked about the importance of identifying whether you're using PFAS. Does that earlier work to determine if you have it and if you're using it? Is that going to help you if the state of Michigan comes calling?
Yeah, I think you'll have that information in hand. Ideally, you'll have an opportunity to avoid that problem by ceasing use of PFAS and preventing releases by going through that analysis. But having the data in hand is always going to be a good idea.
Good. Matt, earlier you had talked about the city drinking water standards and how that might affect manufacturers. What if a manufacturer is on well water? How does PFAS impact somebody using well water?
Well, some industrial wells are regulated under the Safe Drinking Water Act and they require testing. If that's the case, you'll likely be testing for PFAS in the future in those wells. If PFAS is identified, there'll certainly be due care measures, maybe filtration systems, and even reporting requirements that could impose additional liability on sites that have that issue.
Okay, so for well water, it really depends a lot on the particular facts and circumstances of your site, your well, what you're using the water for?
Yes. It should be noted, though, Harvey, that PFAS is present in the environment everywhere. So it's almost background in a lot of locations. So it's not uncommon to find low levels of PFAS in the environment. And so the fact that there's PFAS in your well doesn't necessarily mean that the source was on your site. Nonetheless, there are protective measures you would want to take to protect workers at that location.
Great. As always, it seems like an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure, so it's worth the work on the front end to identify and remove PFAS from your processes and be aware of what some of the issues are so that if something arises later, you're as prepared as possible. Thank you, everyone.